And we're live.
Are we live?
We
Is it
are.
my turn? It's my turn. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. We are on the twice a month schedule now, but some of you may have showed up last week just to look for a program like I did.
I'm not sure we've got sound.
Do we not have sound? Can someone check?
Can't check while I'm on the call.
I don't hear any sound.
Oh, no, yeah, we have sound. We're good. I can hear it on my phone.
We good? Okay,
Yeah.
We're good. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that, folks. Again, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. We're on our every other week or twice a month schedule. And this week we have Rod Pommier, and I don't know if you remember, but last time there were some technical difficulties. I think there was a tornado where Rod lived or something, and it wasn't his fault. So we got shut out, and we have rescheduled him. And he's going to talk to us about a subject, we all know the initials, but we don't really know what's going on with them. So we're going to hear about LDNs tonight, and something we all photograph frequently. In fact, that was my last posted image. So before we get started with Rod, we have a calendar. I don't think I need to bring it up. We have Rod this week, and then we don't have a show next week, and then we have Craig Stocks the week after, and after that, and that's to be announced, so I don't know what the subject is. After that, we have John Talbot, Discoveries of Nebula Around Cataclysmic Variables. Now, that's a project that John works on, and I actually work on it with him as well, as along with a couple astronomers. So, interesting topic. Looking forward to that. And if you look at the calendar, you see we skip every other week. We also have Thanksgiving coming up, but in December 21st, we still have an open session. So once again, anyone out there that has an idea for a topic for astrophotography and would like to talk about it, just go to our site, the astroimagingchannel.org. There's a contact form. Just give us a sentence or two on what you'd like to talk about, and someone will get back to you. And again, you don't have to be the world's expert to do this, but I think we all kind of develop our own little techniques, and those are worth sharing. So put your name down, let us know what you'd like to talk about, and then someone will put you on our schedule. I think that's all I have to say, so fingers crossed. All our fingers crossed, Rod. Hey, good. So it's all your show. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Eric. And I'll take a confirmation my slides are showing up on the broadcast screen.
Yes. You should be okay. We won't find out for a few seconds yet.
All right, well, we want to make sure. We've had our difficulties with this show.
Yeah, right now it's about 30-second delay, so you will be there.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Rod Pommier. I'm in Portland, Oregon, and it's a real pleasure to be back on the show again. The title of my talk tonight is Correct Identification of Lynds Dark Nebulae in Astro Images. Now, if you've been listening to Eric's announcements about this upcoming show for what's been more than 2 months now, you will have heard him say that he, just like me, absolutely loves shooting Lynds Dark Nebulae. These represent a completely different class of deep sky object from the bright nebulae, star clusters, and galaxies that we typically shoot. And they're just beautiful clouds of interstellar dust. And a very nice thing about them is that they're actually a lot like Rorschach diagrams. People see interesting shapes and patterns in the dust clouds, and they come up with interesting nicknames for some of these nebulae. So besides the famous Horsehead Nebulae, we've got an elephant trunk, we've got Napoleon riding on horseback, a cosmic bat, a jumping frog, a hand, a Dementor from the Harry Potter films, and one of my personal favorites, we even have a Boogeyman Nebula. And I'll be showing some examples of some of those Rorschach nebulae later on in the show. Eric also said a few nice things about me. He said that although this sounds like it might be a mundane topic, he said my talks are never mundane, they're always interesting. And one thing that he finds that makes them interesting is that I seem to catch things that other people might not have noticed. And I think tonight's going to be another example of that. So I'm going to go straight into my astrophotography red alert. And that is that if you take images of Lynds Dark Nebulae, it's highly likely that the Lynds Dark Nebulae, or LDNs, in your images will end up misidentified. Or equally problematic, you may have captured some beautiful Lynds Dark Nebulae in your image, but they will remain completely unidentified. Now, as I said, I love shooting Lynds Dark Nebulae, and I've posted a lot of images that I've shot. And I now have to confess to you that I have posted many images that had misidentified and unidentified LDNs in them. But don't worry about me. I couldn't stand the personal embarrassment and humiliation of that. So I've taken all of those badly identified images down off my webpage. But once I discovered this, I started searching the internet, and I found out that the internet is riddled with images in which LDNs are misidentified or remain unidentified. So this is actually a widespread problem. Now, this is not our fault, because as I will show you in great detail tonight, the current resources that we have to identify LDNs in our images, such as PixInsight, the Aladin Sky Atlas, Stellarium, and WikiSky, are woefully inadequate. In fact, I'd go so far as to say they're frankly inaccurate. And another problem is that sometimes these programs completely disagree about what a particular LDN is, and that makes it very confusing. So for me, a frequent imager of Lynds Dark Nebulae, this is an astro imaging problem that is just screaming for a solution. We need a better resource, one that correctly identifies the LDNs in our images and all of the LDNs in our images. And I'm happy to say that I have a fairly surprising solution to this vexing problem that I will be presenting tonight. So here's an outline of tonight's presentation. First, I'm going to talk about the important roles that LDNs can play in our images. Then I'm going to describe how the LDN catalog was actually created, because that might give us some clues about the limitations of the catalog that are leading to these problems. And who knows, it might even suggest a solution. Then I'm going to do some demonstrations. We're going to go through the sky and locate some interesting LDNs that we might want to image, and then shoot some images of them. And then, so that you can experience firsthand, I'm going to try to identify the LDNs using those current resources, so you can get the confusion, the frustration, the pain, and the downright agony of these things not working properly. And then we'll try to identify the LDNs using my new solution and see if it actually solves the problem for us. So let's get excited about Lynds Dark Nebulae. Over the years, we've had a number of presentations on the Astro Imaging channel about how to locate, shoot, and image process dark nebulae. I contributed one of those shows myself on March 12th, 2023, and Molly put a link to that show in the description for this show. So if you're interested in dark nebulae and you haven't seen that show, I recommend you go take a look at it. But if you look at the timeline down below, it wasn't very long into this talk, if you take off some time for announcements and introductions, before I started singing the praises of the Lynds Dark Nebula catalog. And shortly after that, I made a strong argument that the presence of Lynds Dark Nebulae can make an image for you. So here's a slide I pulled from that previous talk. And the way Lynds Dark Nebulae can make an image for us in multiple ways. First of all, they provide contrast. We are typically shooting things that are light. Having a dark object in the frame provides the much needed contrast to make an image dramatic and captivating. For example, NGC 7000, the North American Nebula, would not resemble that continent so strongly if it didn't have a Lynds Dark Nebula posing so convincingly as the Gulf of Mexico. They provide detail, often the finest details visible in the image. Emission and reflection nebulae are, well, nebulous, and they have fuzzy edges, but dark nebulae have globules, knots, filaments, tendrils, wisps that have very well-defined edges that we can sharpen and really make the image snap. A problem that people complain about in astrophotographs is they're flat and two-dimensional, so we need to provide depth of field to make our images look more like terrestrial photography. And Lynds Dark Nebulae are superb for this. We only see them when they're silhouetted in front of background Milky Way stars and emission nebulosity and reflection nebulosity. And that tells our human brains that those objects are clearly in front of the other things, giving us that depth of field. And in some instances, we may have one layer of dark nebulae on top of still another, and billowing and puffy clouds of dark nebulosity. And if you process those properly, you can get a real 3D texture to that image. Now, even if you don't specifically target Lynds Dark Nebulae like Eric and I do, they're going to show up in your images whether you know it or not. And that's because there's an intimate association between bright nebulae and dark nebulae. Emission and reflection nebulae are actually born out of dark nebulae, so they're often co-located in the sky. And so LDNs are likely to be in your images of bright nebulae, and it behooves us to correctly identify them for our viewers, just as we would identify the bright nebulous objects in that frame. So here are some examples of that. So this is the Iris Nebula. It's a blue reflection nebula. And even at this focal length of 3 meters, the blue reflection nebula doesn't take up a lot of the frame. What does take up a lot of the frame is this enormous Lynds Dark Nebula, out of which the iris is emerging. Here's an example with an emission nebula. Again, it doesn't take up the majority of the frame, but the Lynds Dark Nebula that it is being born out of does, and extends well off the field. The famous Elephant Trunk Nebula is itself a Lynds Dark Nebula object, and it is silhouetted against the giant emission nebula IC 1396 in Cepheus. And off to the right is yet another Lynds Dark Nebula separate object. I call this one the Napoleon Riding on Horseback Nebula, because here you can see the profile of Napoleon's face with his nose and his jaw, and he's got a star there for an eye. He's got his French military hat on. Here's the neck and head of the horse, and there's even an outstretched leg of a horse with a flat hoof on the bottom. And once I see that, I can't really unsee it, and it always astounds me just how much this object looks like existing portraits of Napoleon riding on horseback. And even the famous Horsehead Nebula itself is nothing more than a persistent protrusion off the side of an enormous Lynds Dark Nebula that occupies a great region of sky to the east of the bright star Alnitak in Orion's belt. So this famous catalog of dark nebulae was compiled by American astronomer Beverly Turner Lynds and was published in the Astrophysical Journal in 1962. It is now considered a landmark catalog on par with the Messier catalog, the New General catalog, the Index catalog, and the Sharpless catalog. So this is a picture of Dr. Lynds in 1962 when she published that catalog, and she was age 33. And for those of you who don't know and might not have seen it on the internet or in the popular astronomy magazines, she died peacefully in a hospice here in Portland, Oregon, only a couple blocks from where I'm sitting right now, on October 5th, 2024, after suffering a major stroke in early September. She was 95 years old. And the whole reason I have this much more contemporary picture of her is because I'm honored to say that Beverly Turner Lynds was one of my nearest and dearest friends. So how did that come about? Well, a number of years back when I was shooting a lot of Lynds Dark Nebulae, it dawned on me that when it comes to Messier objects, I knew a lot about Messier. And when it came to NGC objects, I could tell you quite a bit about William and John Herschel. And when it came to Caldwell objects, I could even tell you about Sir Patrick Moore. But I really didn't know anything about Beverly Lynds, so I decided to do some research about her. And the first thing I thought of is, well, if she was 33 back in 1962, I don't even know if she's still alive. But I found a Wikipedia page about her, and it didn't have a date of death. So I'm a member of the American Astronomical Society, and with that, you get this large telephone book-sized directory of all the members, and she was still listed as a member. But what shocked me was that her home address was just a couple miles from my home address. And the bonus was there was an email address there for her. So I decided to send her what was essentially a cold call email. And it said something like, "Dear Dr. Lynds, you don't know me, but I'm an amateur astronomer, an avid astrophotographer, and I really enjoy shooting Lynds Dark Nebulae objects. So I'd like to thank you for this tremendous contribution to astronomy and astrophotography." And she very quickly wrote back and she said, "Oh, you are so, so wrong." And of course, it's frightening when a professional astronomer tells an amateur they're wrong. But that's not really what she meant. She said, "You are so, so wrong." She says, "In a way, I do know who you are." She said, "I've been looking at your beautiful astrophotographs and reading the articles you write about them in Astronomy Magazine and Sky and Telescope for years. And I know from your article bylines, you also live in Portland. And I've wondered if you and I might ever run into each other. So what do you say we get together?" So with that, I was in, and we immediately became best astronomy buddies. We would meet on an essentially monthly basis for lunch at our favorite restaurants or in each other's homes. We exchanged email messages on an almost daily basis. And she really loved visiting my observatory. So these are images of her in my dome in May of 2024. This woman could entertain me for hours, telling me stories about all the famous astronomers she knew and had worked with during her career. And this is just a partial list, and it reads like a who's who in modern astronomy. But more importantly, I got to learn a lot about her remarkable life. The story of her tremendous struggles to become a woman astronomer in an age of tremendous gender discrimination. And most appropriate for this talk, she told me the story behind the creation of her famous Dark Nebulae catalog, which I'd like to tell you now. So Beverly Turner was born August 19th, 1929 in Shreveport, Louisiana. But her family moved to New Orleans when she was 3, and that's where she graduated high school. She went back to Shreveport to attend college, and she took science and astronomy courses, fell in love with astronomy, and decided she wanted to become a professional astronomer. So she applied to 4 graduate astronomy programs here in the United States, and she was admitted to 3 programs. And no sooner did she accept a position at the University of Chicago in Yerkes Observatory when the offer was withdrawn, when they found out during a telephone call with her that she was a woman. So she quickly turned to the other 2 programs that accepted her, and they both adopted the same stance. At that period in time, American astronomy programs did not take women, and that was a policy that it persisted at Princeton until as late as 1975. Now, you might ask, how in the world did she get in the first place? Well, she told me the application forms didn't even have a box to check whether you were male or female. She said that it was just assumed you were male. But Beverly is also a man's name if it's spelled with a 3rd E. So they didn't notice that one E was missing and just assumed she was a man. Now, Otto Struve, whose great-grandfather was Friedrich Struve, the Struve double star catalog, actually thought she was a decent applicant. After all, she got into 3 programs anonymously. And he decided to help her. So he said, "Let's strengthen your application. Come to Berkeley and take some astronomy courses from me." And he got her a position as an assistant at Lick Observatory near San Jose. And there she helped Nicholas Mayall measure the radial velocity of galaxies and George Herbig measure spectra of his Herbig-Haro objects using the 36-inch refractor. And with that, Struve was able to convince other faculty members at UC Berkeley to accept her. And so she got her PhD with a thesis on the spectra of white dwarfs in 1955. During this time, she also met fellow graduate astronomy student Clarence Roger Lynds, and they were married in 1954, and Roger was a notable astronomer in his own right. In 1960, the Lynds moved with Struve to Green Bay, West Virginia, where he was taking directorship of the new National Radio Astronomy Observatory. And there she wrote an astronomy textbook with Otto Struve. But Struve also charged her with building an astronomy library for this new observatory from scratch. And that's a very important resource for any observatory prior to the internet. So she ordered all kinds of astronomy textbooks, periodicals, journals, but she also ordered a copy of the newly finished Palomar Observatory Sky Survey #1. This was wide field photographs taken with Palomar's 4-foot Schmidt photographic telescope, and it covers the sky north of -33 degrees declination. Its chief purpose was to look for interesting targets for the 200-inch Hale telescope. When these plates arrived, she put them on a light table And she noticed that the dark nebulae showed up on these plates very well, better than anything she'd ever seen before. And she then knew that she could make a catalog of dark nebulae that would surpass that created by Edward Emerson Barnard from his wide field photographs of the Milky Way in 1927. And the Barnard catalog contains 349 objects. So what she did was to lay sheets of tracing paper over these plates, and she spent countless hours tracing the outline of each dark nebula onto the sheets of tracing paper with a pencil. She then found the center of what she thought was the center of the nebula and recorded its coordinates in epoch 1950 for both right ascension and declination, as well as galactic longitude and latitude. She then measured the area of each dark nebula with a calibrated planimeter in square degrees. And then she gave it a darkness rating on a scale of 1 to 6, where 1 is wispy and 6 is black as the ace of spades. So when she was done with this, she had completed a catalog of 1,802 objects as the Lynds catalog of dark nebulae. This currently has nearly 1,000 citations in the astronomical and scientific literature. And I think most astronomers would be happy if they got 1,000 citations for their entire life's work combined, but to get it for a single publication is really quite remarkable. Following that, she became an assistant and later associate professor of astronomy at the University of Arizona. And then she became assistant director of Kitt Peak National Observatory from 1971 to 1983. And all that time, she continued studying interstellar dust, and she got to be one of the first people to conduct an analysis using the then very new technology of something we all love, which is CCD cameras, of dust in one of our favorite subjects, M20 in Sagittarius. So we can take a break there and see if we have any questions about Beverly Lynds' life up to this point.
I'm
Do you
sorry
have any,
about that.
Alex?
Yeah, no, we're okay. Yeah, there haven't been any questions.
All right, then let's move forward. So let's image some Lynds Dark Nebulae. So I'm going to demonstrate with 3 images, each of which contain multiple LDNs. These are all going to be H-alpha RGB images, and how I acquire and process them is well described in that March 12th, 2023 show. These exposures are typically 10 to 14 hours at f6.8 with my CDK 17. So what I like to do is go to the Aladin Sky Atlas, which is a photographic atlas of the entire sky. And here's the address for that. And up in the top, there's a command window, and you can type in there anywhere you want to go in the sky. You could type in a galaxy, a star, a Messier object, an NGC object. And going back to the elephant trunk, I knew there are a lot of other interesting but infrequently imaged dark nebulae that are silhouetted against IC1396. So up here in the command window, I typed IC1396. And here the Aladin Sky Atlas is taking me to a wide view of this enormous emission nebulae with dark nebulae silhouetted in front of it. And here you can see the elephant trunk. So what I thought was interesting was this entire complex of dark nebulosity. There's a really dark globule there with a lot of material streaming off behind it, like a bridal veil, that I thought would be very interesting. And then down southeast of the Elephant Trunk Nebula, there are a couple other dark nebulae that seem to have some long streamers trailing behind them that would make some interesting shots. So I'm now going to rotate this 90 degrees clockwise so we can zoom in on that first object. So we've done that, and there's the elephant trunk there. And superimposing my telescope camera field of view on this, I thought that that framing would make a very nice dramatic shot. Going down to that area southeast of the elephant trunk, I thought if I oriented my frame this way, I could center that really dark set of globules in the long streamers and also catch another Lynds Dark Nebulae down in the lower right corner. The other place I found in the sky that I thought would be interesting for this demonstration is in Cygnus, just east of NGC 7000, the North American Nebula. There's this really interesting dark globule here, and it's got a bunch of other dark material streaming off to the upper right, and there's some other dark nebulae off to the lower right. So this is how I could frame that with my telescope and camera. So with that, I acquired all the data and processed the images. And so here's the first image of this area that is northeast of the Elephant Trunk Nebula. Here is the area southeast of the Elephant Trunk Nebula. And here is the area east of NGC 7000 in Cygnus. So the images turned out fine. But looking at these, I have this question you probably have. Which LDNs are these? So this will take us straight into the problem of Lynds Dark Nebula identification. And just to put it mildly, identification of LDNs in astro images is a mess. The problem of correct LDN identification is far more ubiquitous than you might think. I've seen many published images in which the LDN number listed in the caption is clearly incorrect. And I'm not going to embarrass any other astrophotographers tonight with that, but we'll show one example of that. So I wrote Beverly's obituaries for the American Astronomical Society, astronomy.com online, Astronomy Magazine, Sky and Telescope.org, and Sky and Telescope magazine. And so here is the obituary that I had for astronomy.com, and I gave them another picture of her. For Sky and Telescope, I gave them that picture of her in my observatory, but they went a step farther. They put on an image of one of her beautiful Lynds Dark Nebulae, which I thought was a very fitting tribute to have in her obituary. And if you look at the caption in the upper right, it says, "This is Lynds Dark Nebula 125 in Cepheus." That is completely incorrect. This is actually Lynds Dark Nebula 43. And to make matters worse, it's not even in Cepheus. That nebula is in Ophiuchus. So, man, when the editors of Sky and Telescope can't get a Lynds Dark Nebula identification correct for the author's obituary, we are in really sad shape. So here's the chief limitation of the Lynds Dark Nebula catalog. It's not photographic, it's all text. And I would defy anyone to be able to tell me what shapes you would expect to see on an image of, say, Lynds Dark Nebula 46 or 56 or 65 or anywhere close to 1,800 other objects in the catalog. We don't really have clues as to how these things should look. The only real clues we have are her listings of the opacity, so we know how dark to expect it, and its area, so we have an idea of how big it might be. But if you take, say, an area of 0.25 square degrees, well, that might be a perfectly round globule that measures 0.25 square degrees, or a very long, drawn-out filament that also measures 0.25 square degrees. So the area alone gives no clue as to the nebula's actual shape. So the reality is that aside from a few well-known LDNs, the shapes of most LDNs are completely unknown to us. Now, as I said earlier, I can't really blame anyone for misidentification of Lynds Dark Nebulae because the resources that we have for astro imagers, whether they're amateur or professional, to identify lead LDNs are woefully inadequate and frankly inaccurate. So I'm going to examine 3 methods of LDN identification in my 3 images. The first will be a favorite for many, PixInsight. In PixInsight, we have a script called Annotate Image. And when you do that, up comes a menu, and you'll need to check LDNs on the menu so that it looks for them. And then what it does after it solves and annotates the images is it places labeled circles on the image that I believe are intended to encircle the LDNs in the image. But as you'll see, they're really offset from the actual targets. The Aladin Sky Atlas doesn't label anything. You have to put a specific object in your search window. So you have to figure out a candidate LDN that you might think you have in the image and type that in the command window. And then it will take you to that region of the sky and it will place a crosshair on the virtual sky where it says that object is located. Stellarium is very simple. It labels a couple things, but most of the time you'll have to search for a specific object. So again, you'll have to enter a candidate LDN that you think you're imaging, and it will take you in the virtual sky and place a crosshair and a circle on the sky. But unlike the Aladin Sky Atlas, it adds a label. And it also provides a separate window with epoch 2000 coordinates, its altitude and azimuth, and its visibility. So let's go to this first image. I picked this target very specifically for a strategic purpose, because I know that that dark nebula from my Barnard's catalog is Barnard 161. I also know that Bev wrote a paper about this nebula, and she wrote in that it is Barnard 161 is her Lynds Dark Nebula 1111. So that gives me a starting point that I can work my way out and try to identify these other nebulae. So let's see how this works. So let's go to the Aladin Sky Atlas, and I said search for LDN 1111, and it put a crosshair right on that dark globule. So that looks great. And then I went to Stellarium, and you can see up at the top here, I put in the search window LDN 1111. And when I did it, it put a circle, a crosshair, and a little label saying LDN 1111. And up here we have a window saying LDN 1111 with its coordinates, altitude, etc. So far, it seems like we have a very positive identification of Lynds Dark Nebula 1111. But this would only work if you use these two programs, because PixInsight's annotate image completely disagrees. While it does put a circle seemingly on this dark nebula that is labeled Barnard 161, for inexplicable reasons, the circle for LDN 1111 is down here on a region of sky where there is nothing. And on the image, we have three other circles. Over here, it says this is LDN 1121. Again, from that paper by Bev, I think this is a correct identification. But up here, we have a circle that's bigger than pretty much all the other circles on the image, and it says this is LDN 1124, but all we really have in this circle is blank sky and several bright stars. Similarly, down here we have a big circle, and it says this is LDN 1112. Well, there's a bit of wispy nebulosity in that. Is that LDN 1112? Seems more likely that this would be LDN 1112. It's a much more prominent dark nebula. But we can't really count on identification, because over here is a perfectly good dark nebula, and there's absolutely no circle associated with it. And that long bridal veil that I wanted to catch coming off of Barnard 161 has no circle associated with it either. So what might be causing this misplacement of circles? Well, Bev's catalog has coordinates listed in EPIC 1950. PixInsight uses EPIC 2000, maybe even updated to 2025. I don't know. So maybe these are just shifted because of 50 years of precession. Well, it's easy. I can just look up the coordinates of these circles on this grid and check them against the coordinates in Bev's catalog. And the coordinates of these LDN circles do not match EPIC 1950 coordinates in the catalog. In fact, precession would carry these circles in a completely opposite direction from the way they're found to be shifted here. So precession doesn't explain the problem. Now, these circles are of different sizes, and I think those are intended to reflect the size of the nebula. So maybe that is a way to match these things. Area of a circle is easy to calculate. It's pi times the radius squared. We can get the radius, we can get a scale from this grid on here. And when I calculated the areas of these circles for these particular objects, they do not match the areas listed in the circle. Well, maybe this is just some other kind of crazy, inexplicable frame shift. We know that this circle really should be up on Barnard 161, which is LDN 1111. So what do you say we just shift this whole coordinate system along a vector like that? Well, if we do that, then the circle for LDN 1112 ends up on this patch of sky where there's nothing. This circle for LDN 1121, which is correct, comes off the correct nebula and ends up here. And this big circle for LDN 1124 goes completely off the frame. And still, despite that, we don't have any frame shift that'll work. I did what Bev does. I made a sheet of tracing paper, traced all these circles, shifted the one for LDN 1111 up on top of Barnard 161 and spun it every which way. And there is no frame shift that will encircle all these dark nebulae within the circles shown. And still, we don't have this identified, we don't have the big bridal veil identified, and we don't have that identified. Well, we have other programs, remember? So I think this is interesting that we have this big circle for LDN 1124 just on a patch of bright blank sky and bright stars. And we have this one down here on some wispy nebulosity. Well, what do the other programs say these nebulae are? So I went to Stellarium and I said, search for LDN 1124, and it put a circle right there in the same spot where we really just have those bright stars. And similarly, when I said search for LDN 1124, it put a circle here, getting the wispy stuff, but not the real dark thing below it. And when I asked the Aladin Sky Atlas, I got the same results for both LDN 1124 and LDN 1112. So I'm confused. I'm really quite lost. So let's try a different image. So this image is known as the jumping frog nebula, because here you can see sideways, like grew between two frog eyes, maybe some cheeks, a thorax and an abdomen, legs with webbed feet. Some people call this the squished frog nebula because it looks like we have some intestines and blood streaking clear across the sky. As a cancer surgeon, I deal with blood and guts all the time, so I'm okay with that, but I think it goes a bit too far for most people. So I decided to start this time with PixInsight annotate image. And it says in this circle that this is Barnard 163. Again, looking at the Barnard catalog, that is a correct identification. It also says that is Lynds Dark Nebula 1104. And I have found several published images of this dark nebula that claim it is LDN 1104. But I have a problem with that because we have this little circle that's smaller than the frog circle, partially overlapping it, saying it's LDN 1103. But once again, this is on a patch of sky that really has nothing in it. Another problem is that this circle for LDN 1104 isn't quite big enough to encompass the jumping frog. Up here, we have a much bigger circle that once again isn't really on anything, and it says that's LDN 1106. So maybe that circle should be down here encircling the frog, and Barnard's 163 is really equivalent to LDN 1106. Well, that's just a frame shift. So once again, we can shift this circle down here to encircle the jumping frog, but then we have to move all the other circles the same amount with it. So that would move these two circles down here where they're essentially on nothing. And we still have not made any identification of this dark nebula. The streaming material above it might be yet another dark nebula. We don't know. This stuff streaming off the jumping frog could be another dark nebula. But there are no circles that go with these things. And down here, there's another dark nebula that I intentionally captured that has no circle associated with it. So remember, we have other programs we can check. So I thought the thing to check would be this circle because it really caught my attention because it seems to be two overlapping nebulae, 1103 and 1104. So what do the other programs say is 1103? So again, I went to Stellarium and I said, search for LDN 1103, and it put a crosshair circle and a label right in that blank section of sky where there's nothing. And the Aladin Sky Atlas, I asked it to search for LDN 1103, and here it put the crosshair in the same spot. So I'm now even more confused than I was with the last image. We have one last chance to try to solve an LDN image on our own with our existing resources. So the thing I really wanted in this image was this really dark globule. And I thought, well, another way to try to do this would be to look in her catalog in a region where we roughly have these same coordinates and look for listings that she labeled as being very dark, like a 5 or a 6, and would be the proper size for this, because you can eliminate a lot of objects based on the square area. So looking at our catalog, I thought LDN 947 and 951 were good candidates in this general area. And I said, well, let's try LDN 951 with some of our other programs. So I went to Stellarium and said, search for LDN 951. And it put a circle and crosshair and a label sort of on that. It's just on the edge, but probably good enough. And when I asked the Aladin Sky Atlas for LDN 951, put a crosshair on precisely the same location. So it seems like we do have a positive identification of LDN 951 as my mysterious dark globule. Once again, PixInsight annotate image completely disagrees. We have 4 circles plotted on my image, but there is no LDN 951 circle anywhere on this image. So PixInsight seems to be saying LDN 951 is nowhere on this picture. Looking at these other circles, we have this very large circle that it says is LDN 949. It looks like that might be trying to indicate this long streamer coming off my mysterious dark globule, but I can't really be sure. We have a very small circle here on blank sky. Is that intended for that dark nebula just to its right? Down here, we have another small circle for LDN 952. It's partially on a dark nebula. So again, is it intended for the small dark nebula just to its right? And here we have LDN 947, which has some dark nebulosity in it, but not the entire object. So this to me did look like a pretty obvious frame shift. If we just scoot this circle over a little bit, we'd get that dark nebula. If we scoot that circle over a little bit, we get that dark nebula. This one would be, more in than out. And this, if we scooted over the same amount, would still have quite a bit of that long streamer. But even if that solves this, we still got no identification of this dark globule that I was interested in the first place. So at this point, I give up. And it's pretty obvious we need a solution. So there seem to be some systematic problems in this, but I can't explain them. I don't know why these things are so wrong in these softwares. But does anybody have any questions about the misidentification problems of Lynds Dark Nebulae?
Yep, we've had a few people ask some questions, and I'm going to go with John at Astro first. Do you need a bright nebula to see a dark nebula in front of it?
You either need a bright nebula reflection or emission, or a lot of Milky Way stars.
Okay, so
if it's over black sky, it really isn't going to be picked up well.
Okay. And Jeff Weiss, who says this is a fascinating story. And then he asks, how accurate is the Sky Atlas 2000?
It doesn't. Oh, Sky Atlas 2000?
Yeah, Sky Atlas 2000.
Yeah, it has errors too. It's a good point. Very good point.
How about your uranometria? Does it?
I haven't checked that one.
You haven't checked that one? Okay.
No.
And then Alex McConaughey. Hey, that's me.
Yeah.
Do we have any access to the original tracings that Dr. Lynn made of the Palomar Skies survey?
Wow, would that be fantastic? Do you have any other questions?
And have you noticed these discrepancies with other catalogs? Like Messier's are probably pretty well nailed down.
Yeah, they're all nailed well.
They all have problems, did you say?
No. I don't have problems with NGC, IC, galaxies, PGC, planetary nebula. They PixInsight, for example, Aladin Sky Atlas, and Stellarium all nailed them. So does WikiSky.
Okay. And I believe that takes care of all the questions that we have of now, but I want to remind people to go ahead and type their questions into the comment section, and we can pass them on to Rod as we go along. Thank you.
Rod, I have a question.
Yes, Eric.
So if you have a nice bright star field and nothing else, and part of it is blotted out, is that an LDN?
Only if she plotted it. And there are things she didn't plot. It's pretty obvious there are some things she just didn't plot.
So you don't necessarily have to have line emission or.
Sorry, your voice was breaking up there. You don't necessarily have to have what?
Means it's dark nebula of some sort, isn't it?
It's a dark nebula of some sort, yes. But I don't think she cataloged every dark nebula that in existence. She obviously seemed to have some type of a cutoff criterion. All right.
I think that's it.
Just a second. Marcia tossed one in here.
Mm-hmm.
Does the Barnard catalog have the same issue with its dark nebulas?
No, all these things seem to identify the Barnard objects spot on.
Thank you.
And I think that's probably because it is a photographic atlas. All those things could have been confirmed.
Hmm.
All
Okay.
right, it's time for my solution. So ever since the beginning of our friendship, Bev just showered me with astronomy-related gifts. She gave me copies of virtually all the papers that she published. She gave me signed over books from her astronomy library, and she actually left me her entire library in her will. But these are my three most precious possessions from her. On the left is an original 1962 edition of the Astrophysical Journal in which she published her catalog of dark nebulae. On the right is an original 1965 edition of the issue of the Astrophysical Journal that contains her bright nebulae catalog. And you can see she personally signed them both to me. So it's cool having copies of these catalogs. It's really cool having original editions of the journals they were published in. And it's super cool to have them signed to you by the person who compiled them. But down here is the most remarkable gift that I ever got from her. This is a reel of microfilm of scan images of her original tracings from which she made her dark nebula catalog. So that's the answer to your question, Alex. And as far as she knows, this is the only existing copy of her dark nebulae tracings. So a lot of us older people remember going to the library and looking at old newspaper articles and magazine articles on microfilm for our term papers and things like that. So as soon as I got this, I hightailed it to the Portland Public Library and I said, I would like to use your microfilm reader to look at this reel of microfilm. And they said, oh yeah, we don't have those anymore. Everything's now digital. They said, but the Selwood branch has our old microfilm reader. Why don't you go there? So I went there in the library and said, yeah, did the main branch tell you we have the microfilm reader? And I said, yes. And they said, no, that's not true. We don't have it. Try the Oregon City branch. And I think I went to 4 libraries before I finally found one. So very excitedly, I sat down, fed this microfilm into the microfilm reader, switched on the light, and lo and behold, here are her original tracings of her dark nebulae. And there's just frame after frame after frame of her original work with all of her annotations of their size and their darkness. And you can see she made coordinate markings on them. So I immediately recognized this Lynds microfilm reel as a significant astronomical artifact and a treasure. And I knew I needed to ensure its preservation. But I also wanted to do something significant with it. So the first thing I did was buy a microfilm scanner, and I fed every frame through here and scanned each one. And I've stored multiple copies of these images on separate drives, and I store them all in separate locations from the main microfilm so that if there's a house fire or something like that, this isn't entirely lost to all of posterity. But what could I do with it that would be a significant new contribution? Well, if you look at one of these tracing sheets, you can see she marked lines of right ascension. She marked lines of declination. She put in the square area of degrees that she measured with her calibrated planimeter, either in the center of the nebula or off to its side. She put the rating on a scale of 1 to 6 of how dark she rated that nebula to be. And then she put a check mark by it or in it to indicate that she had actually included it in her catalog. But what absolutely shocks me is that there is no catalog number next to any of her tracing outlines. So this leaves me asking the same question as I sit staring at these sheets. Which LDNs are these? So then I knew that with Lyn's original tracings, I could solve this LDN identification problem. So this is going to be my significant contribution with this microfilm reel. So what I'm going to do is go through my scanned images and identify and label the LDNs with their correct number as listed in our catalog. Then we would know the actual shape of any LDN based on Lyn's original tracing. And this will enable correct identification of an LDN by direct comparison of its shape in an Astro image with the shape of its outline on her original tracing. So this is the process that I go through. I basically open a scanned image of a sheet in Photoshop. I then determine the coordinates of the sheet from her markings of right ascension and declination that she drew upon it. And then I begin browsing the catalog and find LDNs with coordinates that are in that area. Then I determine the right ascension and declination of the center of each LDN outline on an image. And then I look for an LDN entry in the catalog with a right ascension and declination that match those of the outline as closely as possible to identify a candidate number for that object. But if the square degrees and the darkness rating as written on the sheet for that outline by Lynds herself also match those listed in the catalog by Lynds herself, then its identification is confirmed. Well, then I'll type the number of the LDN next to the outline using the text tool in Photoshop. And after I have them all identified, I flatten the image and I save the image file as a new annotated version. So let's see if this will solve our vexing LDN identification problem. So remember, we started out shooting two objects in IC1396. So this is her sheet of the IC1396 region as she originally had it. And this is my annotated version after I've gone through the catalog and identified each of the dark nebulae on it. And if you look right up here, you can see the outline of the Elephant Trunk Nebula. Up here is Barnard 163, which you can see she is LDN 1111. Now, that first shot I did, it's not all contained on this sheet. In fact, it's contained on two other sheets. It's split up. So that's a little complicated to go through, and I'll skip that for now. Instead, let's go to where we have the jumping frog area and see how this works. So if you zoom in on this, you can see the fidelity that she got in tracing these nebulae. It's pretty easy to see that here she's got the head of the frog and the body and the feet with webbed feet and the blood and guts trailing off from behind it. So we can compare this directly to my image now and come up with correct identifications. What we can see is that the entire jumping frog and all of this material streaming out behind it is all LDN 1106. Down here we have this dark portion is LDN 1103, and larger and fainter above it is LDN 1104. This nebula down in the right lower corner is LDN 1095. There was a very big circle. We'll look at that. We can now compare the PixInsight annotated version to the Lynds microfilm version. So there is a big circle up here saying that this is LDN 1101. That was actually correct by PixInsight. It's obvious that this circle not only is misplaced for LDN 1106, but it's nowhere big enough to tell you that all of this is LDN 1106. Even more perplexing is the orientation of these two overlapping circles. These circles are oriented in an east-west direction of right ascension, whereas in reality in the sky, they should be oriented in a north-south direction with LDN 1103 at the bottom and LDN 1104 at the top. And of course, LDN 1095 in the lower right corner had no identification at all by PixInsight. Now we can go to the region east of NGC 7000 in Cygnus. And here's the area of the dark nebula that I shot on her original tracing, now that I have labeled it. And here's a zoomed in view of that region, and we can compare that to my image. And what we can see now is that this entire dark globule and all the streaming material coming up to the upper right behind it is all LDN 949. You can see she did mark this globule that I was interested in with a very dark number of a 5. These two little globules here and here, those are LDN 952 and 946. And off in the lower right is LDN 947. If you look at her tracing, LDN 951, which Stellarium and PixInsight both said was my dark globule, is here, and that is off the frame. So PixInsight was correct in not putting any LDN 951 circle on here. But if we go back and forth between these, again, you can see the tremendous problems we're having. This circle for LDN 949 is, again, nowhere big enough to encircle this entire nebula and let us know that that entire thing, including the dark globule, is all 949. The other things just seem to be the frame shift I was talking about. If you just scoot these circles to the right a small amount, they would come up with correct identifications of those objects. Going to this, as we said earlier, the upper right hand is LDN 1111. This entire long streaming thing that I call the bridal veil, that is all LDN 1124. Over here, this dark globule was correct as LDN 1121 by PixInsight. But as you can see, we have these problems. Not only is LDN 1111 misplaced, but this circle up here for LDN 1124, nowhere big enough to tell us that all of this is 1124. This one was correct. This turns out is really supposed to have been on the dark part, not this wispy stuff down here like it showed. And this thing down here was not identified at all by PixInsight. So I would ask you, does this method solve our vexing problem of LDN identification? I would say it's a resounding yes, it really does. So I'm about 70% through this project. You can see here, some of her sheets have perhaps 100 dark nebulae traced on them. And it's going to take me many more hours, despite the countless hours already devoted to this project, before I get them all identified and stored. But when finished, we will have a new resource that will enable astro imagers to correctly identify all LDNs in their images by matching their shapes. And I intend to make this resource available to all astro imagers, both amateur and professional, at no charge. So what to do with it? Well, my buddies Dave Eicher and Michael Bakich at Astronomy Magazine love this project, and they have agreed that we can post all of these scanned images online at astronomy.com, where you can access them for free. But I'm interested in other venues that may be of use to other amateur astronomers. I don't think this would make a practical atlas that people would actually spend money on. But I do intend to print one copy of each identified image sheet and then have them leather bound as a visual atlas of LDNs. I was recently nominated and did get successfully elected as a fellow of the Royal Astronomical Society. And so I went there and visited with the librarian. This is Francis Bailey's portrait over the fireplace, and he was president of the Royal Astronomical Society for many years in the 1800s, and it is he who described Bailey's beads. And there's a little plaque below his picture that describes what Bailey's beads are, and on this mantelpiece there are astrophotographs of Bailey's beads, and those are mine from the 2017 and 2024 eclipse. But the librarian showed me their considerable historic holdings, including an original copy of Copernicus's book, where he placed the sun at the center of the solar system, a Starry Messenger original edition by Galileo showing his drawings of the moon and Jupiter's satellites. This is an original July 5th, 1686 edition of Newton's Principia. And this is Caroline Herschel's observing journal, showing August 1st and August 2nd, 1786, where she discovered her first comet. So the librarian's very excited to have that leather-bound copy as an addition to their already considerable historic holdings. If you want to read more about this, this is all written up in the July 2025 issue of Astronomy Magazine. Now, I hope after this, you will go out some clear night and image some Lynds Dark Nebulae. But don't forget, when we go out at night, people say to us, don't let the boogeyman get you. Well, if you go out at night, I hope you actually get the boogeyman. That is the Boogeyman Nebula, which I can confirm for you, absolutely, is part of LDN 1622. And with that, I will stop sharing.
Maybe we have had a couple of comments, perhaps some questions. First off, congratulations. It's a wonderful idea from Astro with Eric and a few other people. Mark asks if this would make it a problem with plate sharing or plate solving. I'm sorry. If the conundrum that you brought up has anything to do with plate solving.
I don't know if things plate solve for LDNs. Has anybody tried that? Have you tried it, Eric?
I answered him that I think plate solvers identify stars.
Yeah.
And a centering done with the plate solve would get you to the coordinates you requested.
Correct.
The problem is your coordinates would not be proper.
That's correct. That is exactly right, Alex.
Yeah.
But you know, there are precession calculators, and it's like sometimes when I'm really have a confusing time looking at her tracings, it's like I can take her 1950 coordinates, put it in a precession calculator, and it tells me the 2000 coordinates, and it helps me zero in on it. So that could help.
Okay. Are there any other questions? If you're coming in, we're going to be getting ready to close off here, so be sure to get your questions in if you have any.
Have you ever tried to overlay her drawings on astrophotographs?
Yes.
Or is it just?
No, you can do it in Photoshop. You can take your thing and stretch it way out, and then it's really remarkable the fidelity she got of the shapes. It's like, you know, when I was looking at LDN 949, there's the globule, and then it goes and there's a spike, and then a mountain, and then another spike. She caught all that. And the same thing with the frog.
You know, when I photograph an LDN, I probably do it in reverse. I find someone that's got the area, and then I crop it down, and then I do a plate solve to make sure I find the structure, rather than just go to the LDN coordinates as in the catalog. Now, that's not because I don't trust them, but I'm looking for a certain image.
Yeah, you want the object you're trying to get in your picture, regardless of all the coordinates and things.
It's not that I didn't trust them. It's just, you know, I want to point the camera right at that structure.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions?
No, I don't think so. We've still got some communication going back and forth.
I can tell you, like every presentation you've ever done, I go in saying, oh, well, this could be interesting. And then when I actually hear it, I go, well, darn, that was really interesting, especially the stories about Lynn herself. I mean,
yeah, I'll miss her dearly.
That was just a wonderful accident that she just lived a couple miles away from you.
Yep, it was.
Yeah. Well, it's too bad she's gone, but it looks like she lived a very long and productive life.
Yeah, she was sharp as a tack to the very end. It was interesting, when she had the stroke, she got admitted to the hospital where I'm a surgeon, and they called her daughter, Susan, who's also a friend of mine in Colorado. And she said, and they said, your mom seems to be refusing all treatments. And, you know, we can give her blood thinners and try to dissolve the clot in her brain, but, you know, we're not sure she's really with it. She's just had a stroke. And so they said, call Rod, he's there, he'll go see her. So I went and saw her, and the neurologists were saying, yeah, she's refusing all treatment, but we're not sure she's in her right mind. So I went in and she could write. Her right hand was still working. And, you know, I asked her astrophysics questions that only she knew the answers to, and she just nailed them. And I came out and I said, she's all there, and she doesn't want any treatment.
Okay. Hey, Rod? Yeah. We did have a question come in, Astro, with Eric, and it's something that I was thinking also. He asks, will you be sharing your identification to software planetariums programs such as NINA, PixInsight, Stellarium? And it's basically, you're going to try to share it with everybody so that they will correct their databases, so that their databases will point to the actual objects.
That's right. I would love to get all those programs corrected, but I wouldn't have the slightest idea how to do it. And a friend of mine at the Memphis Astronomical Society, he told me what the database was they were using. And I don't know why it's so screwed up. And like, why is it showing LDN 1103 and 1104 sideways when it should be vertical? I mean, there's a lot of errors, and one program seems to have copied it into another, but not identically.
And why don't the databases match?
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, there's something that people can check, but you know, to program this in any program would be beyond me. It's like, I don't know if we need to get through to Juan at PixInsight and say, hey, can we do something with this once I get it finished and get these things working?
Well, they're actually just borrowing from an established database.
Right.
They're not actually doing the work. They're
I
just
forgot the
saying,
name that
Yeah.
I was told for that database, but it's got a name, but it's clearly full of errors.
Rod, does the Lynds Bright Nebula catalog have the same sorts of issues? Do you know?
I do not know. It's a whole other project.
Did Lynn stay active once she kind of retired as an astronomer?
She became a Shapley lecturer for the American Astronomical Society, and she did that for a lot of years. But she had a stipulation because of the discrimination she experienced back in the 40s and 50s. She would only lecture at minority colleges and women's colleges. And so she was very inspirational in that respect. But she could talk astronomy, you know, like I said, right up to the very end.
Fantastic. If we're all set, I think we've come to the end of the program. And once again, Rod, that was extremely interesting and probably something I'm going to watch again. Yeah, I think we kind of miss the opportunities to connect with our history of astronomy sometimes. And I guess you were lucky enough to do that.
Yeah, I was. The American Astronomical Society has asked me to give this lecture like this at the next conference in Phoenix, which I'm gladly going to accept that opportunity.
So if we're all set,
we good here.
we all set, Alex?
Yeah, we're good.
We're all
We
good.
got everybody in.
So we'll say goodnight to everyone out there. I hope you enjoyed the program. I certainly did. And we'll see you again in 2 weeks, not next week. So good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you all.
It's new moon. So enjoy the new moon if you're photographing. You want to stay with us for a few seconds when we're done?
Of course.